Hey, what's up? Brent Weaver here, uGuru's founder and Cloudways Maverick, and today we're going to be talking about how to fire a client. Now, if you find yourself in a situation where you have to fire a client, it's probably not a good situation. You might be frustrated, they might be frustrated, there could be emotions involved, and because they're a client, there's money involved, which makes things even more complicated. Now, before we go in and actually unpack how to fire a client, let's first talk about some of the reasons that you might actually need to fire a client. The first type of client that might be worth firing is those that make unreasonable demands. If they're constantly pinging you after your work hours and they have an expectation that you're going to respond late at night, or maybe work on the weekends when that's outside of your boundaries, or maybe when they're requesting stuff that's out of scope constantly and they're obviously going beyond what the contractual obligations are for the work that you've agreed to do. Then there are those clients that always want a lot more for a lot less. Now, if it's on the front side, you might not ever sign the client to begin with, but if you already have the client signed in an agreement and they're constantly asking you for more work or ongoing projects, they're always trying to get more for less, this creates a lot of negative tension because you want to get paid well for your projects and you might feel like you're always being nickel and dimed. Another type of client is the one that doesn't respect your terms of payment. They're constantly paying you late, they're constantly giving you excuses or telling you things that aren't true, like the check's in the mail. And then there are those clients that hardly respond. They're not getting back to you on time. They're not getting you feedback, resources, access, things that end up delaying the project. And if your project ends up taking a lot longer, chances are you're not going to make the money that you want. It's going to affect your cash flow situation, and that's a bad thing. And then there are those clients that are just straight up disrespectful. This has happened to me before where I was in a meeting with a client and the client just straight up disrespected a team member or maybe disrespected me, which I can usually handle a little bit of, tongue in cheek or disrespect. I've got a little thick skin, but when I've seen clients disrespect team members or even other people in their company, a lot of times that's going to give you reason that you don't want to work with them anymore. And depending on the other situations going on, that alone might be reason enough to fire the client. So while it's a few situations that you might come across and give you reason to fire a client, there's really no hard and fast rule about which clients you can fire and which clients you can't fire. Really, it's up to your situation. If you're in a position where you're in a bad relationship with a client and it's not something that you're proud of, it's not something that's giving you energy, it's detracting energy from you, and if you're in a situation where literally you cannot see yourself moving forward in this project or in this client relationship, then you might need to fire the client. So let's talk about what those steps are and how we recommend to cease working with a client. Now, before we go into how to fire a client, it is important for me to tell you that if you do have a contract with a client, there could be legal ramifications for you choosing to stop work on a project, even if you think you have cause. So my advice to you is if you do have a contract with a client and you plan to terminate that agreement, before we go into the steps, I want to encourage you to consult your lawyer or your legal counsel in these types of issues. The first step in firing a client is to communicate clearly and effectively. You can't go into a meeting with a client that you intend to fire and beat around the bush. You can't try to hide the fact that you don't want to work with them anymore and kind of slip it into the end of a sentence or a backhanded comment of like, oh yeah, by the way, we're not going to be working with you anymore. This needs to be something where you clearly communicate with your client. You sit down with them in person or a Zoom call, or you put it into writing. The more clear you're communicating your position and the next steps, the better off you're going to be in these situations. The second thing that we recommend when firing a client is to provide some type of referral. This could be a specific contractor, another agency. It could be a place to find another agency. The challenge, of course, is if you're in a relationship that you don't like the client, you guys aren't working well together, sometimes it's hard to refer somebody else that you know, like, or trust into that relationship. But a lot of times projects go south, not because of a bad relationship level, but just because that it's a bad fit in terms of culture fit and or the types of results the client's looking for. So if you have somebody else in your network that you know could serve this client more effectively, I highly recommend you to provide that referral as part of the solution to them leaving your business. In some cases, I've even paid another company some of the contract fees in order for them to finish off a project because I knew they were better suited for that situation. So whatever you can do, try to provide a next step for your client so that you're not just leaving them out to dry. Number 3 is prepare a script ahead of time. What happens when you actually sit down with a person that you're about to stop working with is you might have a lot of emotions that come up, especially if there's tension in the relationship. You feel like you've been disrespected. You can have a lot of feelings that want to come out in this conversation. And what I would recommend you to do at all times is to keep things as positive and constructive and productive as possible. I know there's a lot of times when you're firing a client that you might think to yourself, oh man, I'm going to let them have it. I'm going to really tell them what I think. And my advice to you is that that's not a good idea. We want to be really kind. We want to communicate clearly. We want to be empathetic in the situation. We know that a client getting this news, even if they weren't treating you well, even if they were underpaying you, is not going to be the best news of their day. And we can create a lot more conflict and a lot more problems if we don't leave on good terms. So by preparing a script, we can make sure that we stay on script. We don't say things that maybe are outside of the scope of what we're trying to communicate, and we can just fall back to that script and those talking points to make sure that we don't ever say something that we don't truly mean. And we don't want to make a situation worse when it comes to firing a client. We already know the situation is bad, so let's not make it worse. The fourth and final step to firing a client, if possible, is to finish the work that you are obligated to finish. If you're not following through on your contractual obligations or the estimate that you provided, my best recommendation is if you can finish the project or finish that milestone, hand that off to somebody else, be able to fulfill on that and set your client up for success with their next provider. That's going to be the best possible situation. You never know when you're going to run across these people again. Maybe they know somebody else that you're working with and they can provide a bad reference. Maybe they're a part of your network. Maybe they're going to say things about you out in the market or niche that you're participating in. You never know how this stuff can come back and haunt you later. So if at all possible, if you are able to follow through on the work, do that. And then if you need to stop working or cease the relationship from that point forward, then that can be a really great way to finish the relationship. So finishing that project, finishing that contract that you have, and then choosing to not do future work with them. And that's really easy to be able to close the loose ends on without feeling like you're obligated to do more. So if you can finish the contract that you're working on, I highly recommend that, and then cease all future projects with them. But if you do have to end the project early, then definitely consult your attorney before you do that. But then try to create an environment where it's going to be a win-win. A win for them to go find a better fit, and a win for you that you're not going to continue to have this negative drain on your energy. And that's really the biggest benefit at the end of the day to firing a client. Yeah, there's the money involved with projects that are bad fits or that are constantly going out of scope or are constantly paying you late. But at the end of the day, bad clients are a huge drain on your emotional and mental space. And by getting rid of them, a lot of times we're able to create a lot more value by moving on and focusing our efforts on clients that really respect us, that we're inspired to work with, and that we enjoy. And that's what this is all about. So I hope you enjoyed today's video about how to fire a client. I hope this isn't something you have to deal with very often, but if you have to deal with it, let's do it the right way. All right, until next time, I'm Brent Weaver.